Sometimes a child's words can carry more weight than a lifetime of prayers. Sister Bernadette learned this truth on an ordinary Tuesday morning when 7-year-old Amara changed everything she thought she knew about faith. The elderly nun had spent 43 years at St. Augustine's chapel, watching children come and go, hearing their innocent tales and childish confessions. Amara was different. She was quiet during prayers, thoughtful during service, and carried herself with a peace that seemed unusual for her age. That morning, as Sister Bernadette arranged flowers by the altar, the little girl approached with calm certainty. "Sister," Amara said softly, "I saw Jesus yesterday." It wasn't the claim that stopped Sister Bernadette cold. She'd heard that before. It was what came next. Amara began speaking about things no 7-year-old should know. Private things, painful memories from Sister Bernadette's past that she had never shared with another soul. How could this child know what had happened all those years ago? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's chapel, casting familiar rainbows across the worn wooden pews where Sister Bernadette had knelt in prayer for more than 4 decades. Her hands moved with practiced reverence as she opened her leather-bound prayer book, its pages soft with age and marked with decades of handwritten notes in the margins. Each notation told a story of faith tested and renewed, of moments when God's voice had whispered comfort into her troubled heart. At 68, Sister Bernadette moved with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to find grace in routine. Her grey habit fell in familiar folds, and her weathered hands bore the calluses of countless hours spent in service, scrubbing floors, tending gardens, and holding the hands of those who sought solace within these sacred walls. St. Augustine's stood in the heart of Detroit's East Side, where abandoned lots competed with community gardens for space, and where hope struggled daily against the weight of broken dreams. The chapel served as more than just a place of worship for the neighborhood. It was a sanctuary in the truest sense, a place where children could find safety after school, where mothers could bring their worries, and where the elderly could remember better times while still believing in brighter tomorrows. Sister Bernadette had watched 3 generations pass through these doors, each carrying their own burdens, each seeking something sacred in a world that often felt forsaken. Sister Margaret emerged from the sacristy, her movements brisk and purposeful. At 52, she brought military precision to her faith, viewing doubt as weakness and unexplained phenomena as distractions from proper devotion. "The flowers need replacing again," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "And we'll need to speak with Mrs. Rodriguez about her children's behavior during service." Behind her came Sister Claire, barely 30, and still bright with the enthusiasm of recent vows. Where Sister Margaret saw problems, Sister Claire found possibilities. Where their elder sister found disorder, the younger woman discovered opportunities for grace. "I think the children were just excited about the Easter preparations," Sister Claire offered gently, her voice carrying the musical quality that made her so beloved by the youngest parishioners. Sister Bernadette smiled at their familiar dynamic. She had been their age once, though those days seemed like chapters from someone else's story. Before the convent, before the vows, before the careful construction of a life dedicated entirely to serving God. There had been another time, another choice, another path that led to heartbreak so profound it had driven her to seek refuge behind these walls. The chapel doors opened with their characteristic creak, admitting a slight woman in hospital scrubs whose exhausted beauty spoke of nights spent caring for others. Maria Santos moved with the quiet urgency of someone perpetually racing against time, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her large eyes holding the weight of single motherhood and double shifts. "Good morning, sisters," Maria called softly, her voice carrying a slight accent that revealed her childhood in Puerto Rico. "I'm running late for my shift, but Amara has her lunch and her homework is finished." She gestured toward the small figure beside her, a 7-year-old girl whose presence immediately shifted the atmosphere of the room. Amara Santos moved with an unusual stillness for a child her age. Where other children fidgeted and chattered, she observed and listened. Her dark eyes held a depth that seemed to peer beyond the surface of things, and when she spoke, adults found themselves leaning in to hear words that often carried unexpected wisdom. She wore a simple yellow dress that her mother had carefully pressed that morning, and in her small hands she carried a worn Bible that seemed too large for her to manage alone. "Thank you for watching her today," Maria continued, pressing a quick kiss to her daughter's forehead. "I'll be back after the evening shift." She hurried out, leaving behind the faint scent of antiseptic and the heavier fragrance of sacrifice that clung to working mothers everywhere. Sister Bernadette studied the child who now stood quietly near the front pew. Over the past 3 months, since Maria had begun bringing Amara to the chapel before her shifts, the nun had noticed something different about this little girl. Other children arrived with backpacks full of toys and snacks, eager to play and socialize. Amara came with her oversized Bible and an adult composure that both impressed and troubled Sister Bernadette. The child never disrupted services, never whispered during prayers, never seemed restless during the long homilies that Father Thomas delivered with passionate conviction. Instead, Amara would sit in the third pew from the front, her small hands folded in her lap, her attention focused entirely on whatever spiritual lesson was being shared. Sometimes Sister Bernadette caught her lips moving silently, as if she were having a private conversation with someone only she could see. "Good morning, Amara," Sister Bernadette said warmly, approaching the child with genuine affection. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm well, sister," Amara replied, her voice carrying the careful pronunciation of a child who had been taught to respect her elders. "I had interesting dreams last night, dreams about the garden behind the chapel." Sister Bernadette paused in her flower arranging. The chapel garden was a small plot of land that she tended personally, a place where she grew roses and vegetables for the community kitchen. Few children showed interest in gardening, preferring the playground equipment that local donors had installed near the parish hall. "What kind of dreams?" she asked gently. "Dreams about forgiveness," Amara said simply, settling into her usual pew with the prayer book in her lap. "About how God understands things that people think are too terrible to understand." The words struck Sister Bernadette with unexpected force. She had spent decades counseling parishioners about God's infinite mercy, offering comfort to those who struggled with guilt and shame. Yet hearing such concepts expressed by a 7-year-old filled her with an inexplicable unease. Children Amaras, age typically dreamed about cartoon characters and birthday parties, not theological concepts that challenged seasoned believers. Sister Margaret approached with her arms full of fresh linens for the altar. "Sister Bernadette, we need to discuss the Easter preparations. The bishop's office has requested detailed reports on our outreach programs and—" She stopped abruptly when she noticed Amara. "Good morning, child. I trust you'll be well behaved." "Today, yes, Sister Margaret," Amara replied with perfect politeness. "I'll pray quietly and help wherever I'm needed." After Sister Margaret moved on to her administrative duties, Sister Bernadette found herself drawn back to the child. There was something in Amara's manner that reminded her of herself at that age, a seriousness that spoke of circumstances beyond her years, an awareness of adult complexities that should have remained hidden from childhood innocence. The morning progressed with its familiar rhythms. Father Thomas arrived to prepare for the noon service, his 80-year-old frame still carrying the dignity of 5 decades in ministry. He greeted Amara with the special gentleness he reserved for children, but Sister Bernadette noticed his eyes lingering on the girl with the same puzzled interest she had been experiencing. As the day unfolded, Amara remained in her chosen pew, sometimes reading from her Bible with surprising fluency, sometimes sitting in contemplative silence that seemed far too mature for someone who should be concerned with playground games and cartoons. Other children who attended the chapel's after-school program played noisily in the parish hall, their laughter echoing through the building like music. But Amara stayed in the sanctuary, surrounded by an aura of peace that Sister Bernadette found both comforting and deeply mysterious. By evening, when Maria returned to collect her daughter, Sister Bernadette had made a decision. Tomorrow, she would pay closer attention to this remarkable child. Something was happening here, something that challenged her understanding of childhood, faith, and the mysterious ways that God worked in human lives. She had learned to trust her instincts over 4 decades of religious service, and those instincts were telling her that Amara Santos was no ordinary 7-year-old. As mother and daughter walked hand in hand toward the chapel doors, Sister Bernadette heard Amara's voice drifting back to her. "Mama, do you think Sister Bernadette knows how much God loves her?" The question hit Sister Bernadette like a physical blow, not because it was inappropriate or presumptuous, but because it seemed to pierce straight through to the heart of doubts she had been carrying for longer than she cared to admit. How could a child her age perceive such things? And why did her innocent question feel like both a comfort and a warning? That night, as Sister Bernadette knelt beside her narrow bed for evening prayers, she found herself thinking not about her familiar supplications, but about the look in Amara's eyes when she had spoken about forgiveness and understanding. There was knowledge there, knowledge that no 7-year-old should possess, wisdom that seemed to flow from a source far deeper than childhood experience could provide. She opened her prayer book to the page she had turned to countless times over the years, where her own handwritten notes filled the margins with desperate pleas for forgiveness. The secret she had carried for more than 40 years seemed to weigh heavier than usual as she prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring another day of service, another opportunity to help her community find peace in their struggles. But tonight, for reasons she could not name, Sister Bernadette felt as though she stood on the edge of something that would change everything she thought she knew about faith, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways that God worked in the world. Tuesday. Morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Sister Bernadette grateful for the warmth of the chapel's interior. She had risen early, as was her custom, to spend time in private prayer before the day's responsibilities began. The sanctuary felt especially peaceful in the pre-dawn hours, when the only sounds were her whispered conversations with God and the gentle settling of the old building around her. She was arranging chrysanthemums near the altar when the chapel doors opened earlier than expected. Maria hurried in with Amara at her side, both of them moving with the urgent rhythm of a schedule that allowed no margin for delay. "I'm so sorry to rush," Maria called softly, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "The hospital called me in early. We have a situation in the emergency ward." She kissed Amara's forehead quickly, gathered her purse, and headed for the door. "I'll see you tonight, Mija. Be good for the sisters." And then they were alone, Sister Bernadette and the child who had been occupying her thoughts since yesterday. Evening. Amara moved to her usual pew with practiced quietness, settling herself with the careful movements of someone much older than 7 years. She placed her oversized Bible beside her and folded her small hands in her lap, but instead of opening the book or beginning to read, she simply sat watching Sister Bernadette arrange the flowers. "Sister," Amara said after several minutes of comfortable silence, her voice carrying that same serious tone that always surprised adults. "I saw Jesus yesterday." Sister Bernadette's hands stilled on the flower stems. She had heard this claim from dozens of children over the years. Earnest declarations of divine visions that usually involve Jesus appearing in dreams or clouds, or particularly interesting tree formations. Such claims were part of childhood's natural spiritual development, and she had learned to respond with gentle encouragement while helping young minds understand the difference between imagination and authentic spiritual experience. "Did you, dear one?" Sister Bernadette replied warmly, turning to face the child. "That must have been very special for you. Can you tell me about it?" Amara's expression remained perfectly calm, her dark eyes meeting Sister Bernadette's with startling directness. "He was sitting in the garden behind the chapel, by the rose bushes you planted near the statue of St. Francis. He looked exactly like the painting above the altar, but his eyes were kinder, much kinder than any painting could show." Sister Bernadette felt a small flutter of surprise. Most children who claimed to see Jesus described him appearing in their bedrooms or during particularly vivid dreams. The specificity of Amara's description, the exact location in the chapel garden, the reference to the roses she had indeed planted near the statue, was unusual for a child's imagination. "That's very interesting, Amara," Sister Bernadette said. "Carefully. What did he say to you?" "He said he wanted to talk to me about you," Amara replied without hesitation. "About how much pain you've been carrying, and how it's time for you to understand something important about forgiveness." The words hit Sister Bernadette like cold water. Children didn't typically involve other adults in their religious fantasies, unless those adults had somehow prompted the direction of their imagination. She had never discussed her personal struggles with any of the children in their care, certainly not with Amara, who was still relatively new to their community. "About me?" Sister Bernadette asked, her voice carefully controlled. "What kind of things did he say?" Amara tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. "He said you made a choice a long time ago, before you became a nun. A choice about a baby. And he said you've been punishing yourself ever since, thinking that God could never forgive what you did." Sister Bernadette's breath caught in her throat. The flower she had been holding slipped from her fingers and fell to the marble floor with a soft whisper of petals. In 43 years of religious life, she had confessed that ancient sin to only one person, Father Michael, who had died more than a decade ago. Not even Father Thomas, who had been her spiritual director for the past 12 years, knew the complete truth about what had driven her to seek refuge behind convent walls. "Amara," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "who told you to say these things to me?" "Jesus told me," the child replied with perfect simplicity. "He said he's been waiting a very long time for you to stop carrying that weight. He said the baby understood even then. The baby forgave you before you even asked for forgiveness." Sister Bernadette sank into the pew across from Amara, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The secret she had guarded for nearly half. A century hung in the air between them like incense, heavy, sacred, and impossible to ignore. How could this child know about a decision made decades before she was born? How could she speak with such certainty about events that had never been recorded in any document, never been shared with any living soul? "How do you know these things?" Sister Bernadette asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Amara reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully and handed it to Sister Bernadette. It was a child's drawing, executed in crayons with the careful attention to detail that marked Amara's approach to everything she did. The image showed a figure in robes standing in a garden, surrounded by roses, But it was the details that made Sister Bernadette's heart race. The exact shade of brown she used for her habit, the specific way she wore her veil, even the small scar on her left hand from a gardening accident. Years earlier, and beside the figure of the nun, stood another form, taller and dressed in white, with arms extended in a gesture of infinite compassion. The face was rendered with surprising skill for a 7-year-old's artwork, and the eyes held an expression of such profound love that Sister Bernadette felt tears gathering in her own eyes. "He looked just like this when I saw him," Amara said matter-of-factly, "and he said to draw this picture for you so you would know that he really came to talk to me about your heart." Sister Bernadette stared at the drawing with growing amazement. The child had captured not just the physical details of the chapel garden, but something deeper. The sense of peace that place held for her, the way the morning light fell across the roses, even the particular bench where she often sat for private prayer. "Amara," she said carefully, "this is very detailed for someone your age. Have you been watching me in the garden?" "Sometimes," the child admitted, "but I didn't draw this from watching you. I drew it from seeing you with him. He showed me how much he loves you, Sister Bernadette. He showed me how proud he is of all the people you've helped over the years, and he showed me how sad he gets when you think you're not worthy of his love." The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over. Sister Bernadette found herself weeping in a way she hadn't allowed herself to weep in decades. Deep, cleansing sobs that seemed to rise from the very depths of her soul. All the guilt she had carried, all the self-punishment she had inflicted, all the midnight prayers begging for a forgiveness she couldn't believe she deserved, it all poured out of her in the presence of this impossible child who spoke with the voice of divine mercy. Amara slipped out of her pew and moved to sit beside Sister Bernadette. She took the older woman's weathered hand in her small, warm fingers and simply held it while the nun wept. There was no judgment in her touch, no childish discomfort with adult emotion, just the presence of someone who understood pain and offered comfort without explanation or condition. "He said to tell you that the baby is safe," Amara whispered, when Sister Bernadette's sobs had quieted to gentle tears. "He said to tell you that love never dies, and that some choices look different from heaven than they do from here." Sister Bernadette looked into the child's face and saw something that defied every rational explanation she could construct. Whether this was divine intervention, childhood fantasy, or something else entirely, it had touched the deepest wound in her heart with surgical precision. The words Amara had spoken, words no 7-year-old should know, concepts no child should understand, had somehow found their way to the exact place where she needed healing most. "Why you?" she asked finally. "Why would Jesus choose to speak through a little girl?" Amara smiled then, the first truly childlike expression Sister Bernadette had seen from her. "He said grown-ups sometimes forget how to listen with their hearts. He said children still remember how to believe impossible things." As the morning progressed and other people began arriving at the chapel, Sister Bernadette found herself studying Amara with new eyes. The child returned to her normal activities, reading from her Bible, sitting quietly during prayers, helping Sister Claire organize supplies for the afternoon program. But now Sister Bernadette noticed things she had missed before. The way other children seemed drawn to Amara's peaceful presence, how adults found themselves speaking more honestly when she was near, the subtle but unmistakable sense that something sacred hovered around this small girl like an invisible benediction. When Sister Margaret asked about her red-rimmed eyes, Sister Bernadette simply said she had been moved by her morning prayers. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it felt inadequate to describe an encounter that had shaken the very foundations of everything she thought she knew about God, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways that healing could arrive through the most unexpected messengers. That evening, as she knelt for her nightly prayers, Sister Bernadette found herself holding Amara's drawing like a sacred relic. The child's simple crayon artwork had become more precious to her than any religious icon she had ever owned. It was proof, not of what she had experienced, which might have been imagination or wishful thinking, but of something far more profound, that God's love could work through anyone, anywhere, at any time, in ways that defied human understanding, but touched human hearts with perfect precision. She fell asleep that night with the drawing pressed to her chest, and for the first time in 43 years, she did not beg God's forgiveness for her ancient sin. Instead, she simply said thank you for sending her exactly what she needed, exactly when she needed it, through the most unlikely messenger imaginable. Sister Bernadette spent Wednesday night staring at the ceiling of her small cell, her mind racing through every possible rational explanation for what had occurred. Perhaps Maria had mentioned something about Sister Bernadette's past during casual conversation with her daughter. Perhaps the child had overheard fragments of confessions or counseling sessions that had taken place in the chapel when she thought no one was listening. Perhaps her own emotional state had somehow influenced how she interpreted an innocent child's words. Yet each explanation crumbled under scrutiny. Maria Santos was a relatively new member of their community, having moved to Detroit only 6 months earlier when her mother's illness required specialized care. She worked double shifts at the hospital and had little time for the kind of intimate conversations that might reveal another person's deepest secrets. More importantly, the details Amara had shared, the reference to the baby, the specific language about choices and forgiveness, matched the exact words Sister Bernadette had used in her private confessions decades earlier. Thursday morning brought no clarity, only a growing sense that her ordered world was shifting beneath her feet. She found herself watching Amara with the intensity of a scientist observing a fascinating specimen, looking for clues that might explain the impossible. The child remained exactly as she had always been, polite, thoughtful, surprisingly mature, but still recognizably a 7-year-old who colored outside the lines and sometimes forgot to tie her shoes properly. During the lunch hour, while Sister Claire supervised the after-school program and Sister Margaret handled administrative duties, Sister Bernadette made a decision that felt both necessary and invasive. She would speak with Maria Santos directly, carefully probing to discover whether there was any earthly source for her daughter's inexplicable knowledge. The opportunity presented itself that evening when Maria arrived to collect Amara. The young mother looked exhausted, her hospital scrubs wrinkled from another long shift, her dark hair escaping from its practical ponytail. She moved with the particular weariness of someone who carried responsibilities far beyond her years, and Sister Bernadette felt a familiar pang of maternal concern for this struggling woman who had somehow raised such an extraordinary child. "Mrs. Santos," Sister Bernadette said gently as Amara gathered her belongings, "might I speak with you privately for a moment? Nothing concerning, just some observations about your daughter that I thought you might find interesting." Maria's tired eyes immediately sharpened with the alert attention of a mother who had learned to interpret every nuance of communication about her child's welfare. "Of course, sister. Is there something wrong? Has she been misbehaving?" "Quite the opposite," Sister Bernadette assured her, leading Maria to a quiet corner of the chapel while Amara waited patiently in her usual pew. "Your daughter is remarkable in many ways. Her maturity, her spiritual awareness, her way of speaking about complex concepts. I find myself wondering about her background, her early experiences that might have shaped such wisdom." Maria's expression softened with the mixture of pride and concern that characterized most conversations about exceptional children. "She's always been different," she admitted quietly. Even as a baby, she seemed to watch everything with such serious attention. When she started talking, she used words that made me wonder if she'd been reading dictionaries when I wasn't looking. Have you noticed her speaking about religious topics at home? Conversations about God or Jesus or spiritual matters beyond what you might expect from someone her age. Oh yes, Maria laughed softly. Sometimes I find her in her room, having what sound like full conversations with someone I can't see. When I ask her about it, she tells me she's talking to her friend about important things. I assumed it was an imaginary friend. Most children have them at some point. Sister Bernadette felt her pulse quicken. Has she ever mentioned these conversations involving other people? Adults in her life, perhaps? Maria paused, her brow furrowing with the effort of memory. Actually, yes. A few weeks ago, she told me that her friend had asked her to pray for someone who was carrying heavy sadness, someone who needed to remember that God forgives everything, even the things people can't forgive themselves for. She looked directly at Sister Bernadette. She said this person was someone very good who had forgotten how good she really was. The words hit Sister Bernadette with stunning precision. She managed to keep her expression neutral, but inside, her heart was racing. This was not childhood imagination or casual eavesdropping. This was something far more profound and far more impossible to explain through conventional means. Did she say anything else about this person? Sister Bernadette asked carefully. She said her friend told her that this person had made a choice a long time ago that still hurt her heart, and that someday soon she would need to help this person understand that God never stopped loving her, not even for a single moment. Maria's tired eyes studied Sister Bernadette's face. Sister, is there something specific you're trying to understand about my daughter? Sister Bernadette found herself at a crossroads. She could retreat into safe generalities, protecting her secret while missing an opportunity to understand what was happening to them. Or she could trust this young mother with at least part of the truth, opening herself to judgment but possibly gaining crucial insight. Your daughter spoke to me yesterday about things that no one alive knows about my past, Sister Bernadette said quietly. Things that would be impossible for her to know through any normal means. I'm trying to understand how that could be possible. Maria's eyes widened slightly. What kind of things? Personal things, painful things from before I took my vows, things I've never shared with anyone except God. Sister Bernadette hesitated, then took a leap of faith. Has Amara ever demonstrated knowledge about other people's private matters? Information she couldn't possibly have acquired through normal means? Actually, Maria said slowly, there was something last month that puzzled me. She told me that Mrs. Chen from our apartment building was going to get good news about her grandson soon. She was very specific. She said the doctors would find out they were wrong about his illness, and that he was going to be fine. I thought, it was just wishful thinking because everyone in the building knew Mrs. Chen was worried sick about the boy. And was she right? Completely. 3 days later, Mrs. Chen knocked on our door crying with joy. The doctors had discovered their initial diagnosis was wrong. What they thought was serious was actually something minor and easily treatable. Maria shook her head in amazement. When I asked Amara how she knew, she said her friend had told her it would be a week of good news for people who had been praying very hard. Sister Bernadette felt a chill run down her spine. This was not the behavior of an unusually perceptive child or someone with access to privileged information. This suggested something far beyond normal human capabilities, something that touched on the miraculous, the divine, or at least the profoundly mysterious. Mrs. Santos, she said carefully, I want to ask you something that might sound strange. Have you ever considered the possibility that your daughter might be experiencing something genuinely supernatural, some kind of authentic spiritual gift? Maria was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving to where Amara sat peacefully in the pew, her small hands folded in prayer. "Sister, I was raised Catholic, but I'm not sure I'm a very good one anymore. Life has been hard since Amara's father left, and sometimes I struggle to believe that God pays attention to people like us. But I know my daughter is special. I've known it since the day she was born." "Special how?" "The nurse in the delivery room said she'd never seen a baby born with such peaceful eyes. Most newborns cry and struggle, but Amara just looked around, like she was taking inventory of a place she recognized. As she grew up, she seemed to understand things about people's feelings that I couldn't explain. She would comfort me when I was sad before I even realized I was sad. She would tell me to pray for neighbors I barely knew, and later I'd find out they were going through terrible struggles." Sister Bernadette absorbed this information with growing amazement. Here was confirmation that Amara's extraordinary perceptions extended far beyond their recent encounter. This child had been demonstrating supernatural awareness for years, quietly touching lives with knowledge that defied explanation. "Has she ever mentioned seeing Jesus before this week?" Sister Bernadette asked. "Not directly, but she's always talked about her friend who teaches her important things. She describes him as someone very kind, who loves everyone, especially people who think they're not lovable." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sister, do you really think it's possible that my little girl is talking to Jesus?" Sister Bernadette looked across the chapel at Amara, who had opened her oversized Bible and was reading with the careful attention of a scholar. The afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to gather around the child like a gentle benediction, and for a moment Sister Bernadette could almost see what Maria's hospital nurse had described, an otherworldly peace that surrounded this small girl like an invisible embrace. "I think," Sister Bernadette said carefully, "that your daughter is touched by something sacred, whether that's Jesus himself, an angel, or some other manifestation of divine love. I cannot say with certainty, but I do know that she has shared things with me that have brought healing to wounds I've carried for decades. If that's not miraculous, it's certainly the closest thing to a miracle I've ever experienced." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I've been so afraid," she whispered, "afraid that people would think she was disturbed or making things up. Afraid that I was failing her somehow by not understanding what she needed. But you think she might really be blessed, I think," Sister Bernadette said gently, placing a comforting hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "That God has given you a very special daughter, and I think he has brought her into our lives for reasons that are only beginning to become clear." As they walked back toward Amara, Sister Bernadette felt a weight lifting from her heart. The child was no longer an impossibility that challenged her understanding of reality. She was a gift, mysterious, profound, and utterly genuine in her connection to something divine. Whatever was happening here, it was real, it was sacred, and it was changing everything about how Sister Bernadette understood faith, miracles, and the infinite creativity of God's love. That night, she carefully placed the faded photograph she had kept hidden in her prayer book for 4 decades, the picture of herself as a young woman holding the hand of someone whose face she had tried so hard to forget, next to Amara's drawing on her bedside table. 2 images separated by more than 40 years, yet somehow connected by the mysterious threads that God weaved through human lives in ways too wonderful and terrible to fully comprehend. Friday morning brought Sister Margaret's sharp knock on Sister Bernadette's door before the morning bell had even rung. "We need to talk," she announced without preamble, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had made her an effective administrator, but sometimes strained her relationships with the more pastoral members of their community. Sister Bernadette opened her door to find Sister Margaret standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, her expression combining concern with barely controlled irritation. "Is something wrong?" Sister Bernadette asked, though she suspected she already knew the direction this conversation would take. "Sister Claire mentioned that you've been spending considerable time with that Santos child, asking unusual questions about her family background and her religious experiences. She also said you seemed quite emotional after speaking with the child on Tuesday." Sister Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "I need to understand what's happening here before it becomes a problem for our community," Sister Bernadette invited her colleague into her small room, gesturing toward the single chair while she remained standing near the window. The morning light revealed the exhaustion she had been carrying for the past several days, the weight of trying to process something that defied rational explanation while maintaining her normal responsibilities and composure. "Sister Margaret," she began carefully, "I've been counseling members of this community for more than 4 decades. I've learned to recognize when someone is experiencing something genuinely spiritual versus when they're struggling with emotional or psychological difficulties. This child, Amara, she's demonstrating knowledge and wisdom that I cannot explain through normal means." "What kind of knowledge?" Sister Margaret's tone remained skeptical, but carried a note of genuine interest. Sister Bernadette found herself at another crossroads. She could offer vague generalities that would satisfy Sister Margaret's curiosity without revealing the deeply personal nature of her experience. Or she could trust her colleague with enough truth to help her understand the significance of what they were witnessing. "She knows things about my past that no living person knows," Sister Bernadette said quietly. "Specific details, exact circumstances, even the emotional context of decisions I made decades before she was born. She speaks about these things with compassion and understanding that would be remarkable in an adult theologian, much less a 7-year-old child." Sister Margaret's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "Sister Bernadette, what you're describing sounds like something that should be brought to Father Thomas's attention immediately. If this child is claiming to have supernatural knowledge about private matters, we need to proceed very carefully." "I agree completely," Sister Bernadette replied, feeling relief at finding common ground. "But I also think we need to approach this with open hearts. Whether this is divine intervention, an unusual psychological gift, or something else entirely, it's having a profound impact on people in our community." "What kind of impact?" Before Sister Bernadette could answer, they were interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Sister Claire's voice called softly, "Sisters, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Amara is asking to speak with Sister Bernadette. She says it's important." The 3 nuns made their way to the chapel, where they found Amara sitting in the old wooden confessional booth, not inside the enclosed spaces meant for penitent or priest, but on the small bench that faced both chambers. She looked even smaller than usual in the shadow of the imposing wooden structure, her yellow dress bright against the dark oak that had absorbed decades of whispered confessions and absolutions. "Good morning, sisters," Amara said politely, rising from the bench with the careful respect she always showed to the religious community. "I hoped I could speak with Sister Bernadette alone, but if you need to hear this too, that would be fine." Sister Margaret exchanged a meaningful glance with Sister Bernadette. "What would you like to discuss, child?" "I had another conversation with my friend last night," Amara said simply. "He told me that Sister Bernadette has been worried about whether people will believe what she experienced. He said she's been trying to find explanations that make sense to other grown-ups, instead of just accepting the gift he gave her." Sister Bernadette felt her breath catch. Once again, the child had identified her exact emotional state with surgical precision. She had indeed spent the past 3 days cycling between wonder at what she had experienced and desperate attempts to rationalize it into something that wouldn't challenge her colleagues' understanding of normal spiritual experience. "And what did your friend suggest she should do?" Sister Margaret asked, her voice carefully neutral. Amara turned her serious dark eyes toward Sister Bernadette. "He said to tell you that faith isn't about having explanations for everything. It's about trusting God's love even when, especially when, it shows up in ways that surprise us." She reached into her small purse and pulled out another drawing, this one executed with even more care than the first. It showed the confessional booth where they now sat, but instead of the usual somber atmosphere of penance and judgment, the scene was suffused with golden light. 2 figures knelt within the booth. One clearly Sister Bernadette, recognizable by her distinctive profile and the way she held her hands during prayer, and another figure whose presence seemed to radiate peace and forgiveness. "He showed me what really happened the last time you came here to confess your deepest secret," Amara said softly. "He showed me how he was here with you, even though you couldn't see him. He was holding your heart while you cried, Sister Bernadette. He never left you alone with your pain, not even for one moment." Sister Margaret stepped closer to examine the drawing, her administrative skepticism warring with growing amazement at the child's artistic ability and the profound spiritual themes she was expressing through her simple artwork. The image was far more sophisticated than typical children's drawings, but more than that, it captured emotional and spiritual truths that seemed to transcend the medium. "Amara," Sister Margaret said carefully, "this is a very detailed picture of something that would have happened before you were born. How do you know what Sister Bernadette looks like when she prays?" "I watch her sometimes," Amara replied matter-of-factly. "But I didn't draw this from watching her now. I drew it from seeing what really happened then. My friend showed me so I could help her understand that she was never alone, even when she felt most abandoned." Sister Claire, who had been listening in thoughtful silence, knelt down to Amara's eye level. "Sweetheart, when you talk about your friend, you mean Jesus, don't you?" Amara nodded solemnly. "He looks just like the painting above the altar, but his eyes are more alive, and when he smiles, it feels like being wrapped in the softest blanket on the coldest day. He loves everyone so much, Sister Claire, but he gets especially happy when people who think they're not lovable finally understand how precious they are to him." The simple profundity of the child's words settled over the 3 nuns like a benediction. Even Sister Margaret's practiced skepticism seemed to waver in the face of Amara's calm certainty and the obvious love that motivated everything she said and did. "Amara," Sister Bernadette said gently, "why do you think Jesus chose to speak with you about these things? Why not appear directly to the people who need his help?" The child considered this question with the seriousness she brought to all theological discussions. He said grown-ups sometimes have too many walls around their hearts, walls made of hurt and shame and fear. He said children's hearts are still soft enough to let love in and trust enough to let love out. She stood and walked to Sister Bernadette, taking the older woman's weathered hand in her small, warm fingers. He also said that sometimes people need to hear truth from someone who couldn't possibly have any reason to lie to them. He said, when a child tells you something important, you listen with a different part of your heart. As if to demonstrate her point, Amara turned to Sister Margaret with the same direct, compassionate gaze she had been offering Sister Bernadette. "He wants you to know that your strictness comes from love, not from meanness. He sees how much you care about keeping everyone safe, and he's proud of how hard you work to protect this community." Sister Margaret's carefully controlled expression cracked slightly. For someone whose entire identity was built around maintaining order and proper procedures, being seen and understood by a 7-year-old child was both disconcerting and deeply moving. He also said, Amara continued gently, that it's okay to let yourself wonder about miracles sometimes. Wondering doesn't make you less faithful. It makes you more human. The three nuns stood in silence, each processing what they had witnessed in their own way. Sister Clare's natural openness to mystery made her the most ready to accept what seemed to be happening. Sister Margaret's administrative mind struggled with phenomena that couldn't be documented or regulated, but her heart was responding to the obvious sincerity and love that emanated from this remarkable child. And Sister Bernadette found herself caught between gratitude for the healing she was experiencing and concern about what this might mean for their community. "Amara," Sister Bernadette said finally, "has your friend said anything about what we should do with these messages? Whether we should share them with others or keep them private?" "He said that depends on what people need to hear," Amara replied, with the practical wisdom that consistently surprised adults. "Some people need to know that God still speaks to his children. Some people need to know that miracles happen in ordinary places to ordinary people. And some people need to know that being chosen for something special doesn't make you better than everyone else. It just makes you responsible for sharing love in whatever way you can." She gathered her drawings carefully, treating them with the reverence due to sacred objects. "He said there's going to be a special Sunday soon, when many people will need to hear about God's forgiveness and love. He said that's when the message will be complete." As the child prepared to return to her usual pew for private prayer, Father Thomas appeared in the chapel entrance, his elderly frame moving with the careful dignity of 8 decades of faithful service. His eyes took in the scene, 3 nuns clustered around a 7-year-old girl, their faces reflecting various stages of wonder and confusion. "Good morning, ladies," he said warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Sister Margaret stepped forward, her administrative instincts reasserting themselves. "Father Thomas, we were hoping to speak with you about some unusual spiritual experiences that have been occurring in our community. Would you have time to meet with us privately?" Father Thomas's wise eyes moved to Amara, who had taken her seat and opened her Bible with characteristic composure. "Of course, but first let me ask, does this have anything to do with our young friend there?" "Why do you ask?" Sister Bernadette inquired, curious about his perception of the situation. "Because," Father Thomas said with a gentle smile, "in 50 years of ministry, I've learned to recognize the presence of the sacred, and that child carries something special with her wherever she goes. I've been wondering when someone would finally notice." His words confirmed what Sister Bernadette had been sensing but hadn't dared to articulate fully. Amara Santos was not just an unusually perceptive child or someone with remarkable intuitive gifts. She was a conduit for something divine, a messenger, whose very presence seemed to awaken the best and holiest impulses in everyone around her. As they made plans to meet with Father Thomas later that day, Sister Bernadette found herself looking forward to the conversation with a mixture of anticipation and relief. For the first time since Tuesday morning, she didn't feel alone with the overwhelming mystery of what was happening to their community. Whatever this was, divine intervention, miraculous gift, or something else entirely, it was bigger than her ability to understand or manage alone. That afternoon, as she watched Amara read her Bible with the focused attention of a scholar, Sister Bernadette whispered a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious ways that God worked in human lives. She still didn't understand why this child had been chosen to carry such messages, or why those messages had been directed toward her own wounded heart. But she was beginning to understand that some gifts were meant to be received with wonder rather than analyzed with logic, embraced with faith rather than explained with reason. Father Thomas listened to their account with the patient attention he had cultivated through 5 decades of hearing confessions, counseling the troubled and witnessing the inexplicable ways that faith manifested in human lives. His office, tucked behind the sacristy, contained the accumulated wisdom of his long ministry, theological texts worn smooth by decades of reference, photographs of parishioners from different eras, and the kind of comfortable furniture that invited honest conversation. Sister Bernadette had brought the hospital bracelet she had kept hidden for 43 years, a thin plastic band yellowed with age, bearing a patient number and dates that marked the most devastating period of her young life. She placed it on Father Thomas's desk like evidence in a trial, though she wasn't sure whether she was the defendant or the witness. "This is from the hospital where I gave birth," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the revelation. "I was 19 years old, unmarried and terrified. The complications during delivery were severe, and the doctors told me the baby died before taking a first breath." Father Thomas examined the bracelet with gentle reverence, understanding that he was being trusted with a secret that had shaped Sister Bernadette's entire adult life. "And this is the loss that drove you to religious life?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I believed that God was punishing me for my sins, that the death of my child was divine judgment for my choices. I came to the convent seeking forgiveness for what I thought was unforgivable, and penance for what I believed was unpardoned." Sister Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair. As someone who had entered religious life through calling rather than desperation, she struggled to understand how guilt and shame could serve as the foundation for a spiritual vocation. Yet she could not deny the evident sincerity of Sister Bernadette's faith or the decades of selfless service that had marked her ministry. "And now this child, Amara, claims that Jesus has told her about these events?" Father Thomas asked, his tone carefully neutral. "More than claims, Father," Sister Clare interjected. "She demonstrates knowledge that would be impossible for her to possess through any normal means. She speaks about Sister Bernadette's past with details that no living person knows, and she offers comfort and insight that seems to come from a divine source." Father Thomas turned to Sister Bernadette with eyes that had seen enough of life's mysteries to remain open to possibilities that defied conventional explanation. "Tell me exactly what she said to you." Sister Bernadette recounted Amara's words with careful precision, including the child's references to the baby and her assurances that God had never stopped loving Sister Bernadette despite her ancient choices. She showed him Amara's drawings, pointing out the impossible details that the child had somehow captured with startling accuracy. She said that Jesus told her the baby understood and forgave me before I even asked for forgiveness. Sister Bernadette continued. She spoke about choices looking different from heaven than they do from here, and she said that God had been waiting a very long time for me to stop carrying that weight. Father Thomas studied the drawings with the careful attention he brought to all potentially sacred phenomena. His long experience had taught him to distinguish between genuine spiritual gifts and various forms of psychological or emotional projection. What he saw in Amara's artwork transcended childish imagination. These images captured theological truths with a sophistication that suggested either exceptional spiritual maturity or authentic divine inspiration. Have any of you considered the possibility that this child might be experiencing what the Church calls private revelation? He asked thoughtfully. Throughout history, God has chosen to communicate through individuals who seemed unlikely messengers, children, peasants, people who had no earthly reason to fabricate such experiences. Sister Margaret frowned. Father, surely we need to be cautious about making such claims. The Church has very strict procedures for evaluating alleged supernatural phenomena. Indeed we do, Father Thomas agreed, but we also have an obligation to remain open to the ways that God continues to work in our world. The question is not whether we should immediately declare this child a visionary, but whether we should pay attention to the fruits of her claimed experiences. He turned back to Sister Bernadette. You mentioned that Amara's words brought you healing from wounds you've carried for decades. Can you describe the nature of that healing? Sister Bernadette considered the question carefully. Since Tuesday morning, she had noticed profound changes in her inner life, a lightness in her prayer, a sense of peace that had replaced her familiar burden of guilt, an ability to speak about her past without the crushing shame that had defined her relationship with those memories. For 43 years, I have begun and ended each day asking God to forgive me for choices I made as a young woman, she said slowly. I have performed penances, devoted my life to service, and tried to earn redemption through good works. But I never truly believed that forgiveness was possible for someone like me. She paused, gathering courage for the most honest statement she had ever made to another human being. Since Amara spoke to me about God's love and understanding, I have felt that burden lifting, not because I've convinced myself that my choices weren't wrong, but because I've begun to believe that God's mercy is truly infinite, that it extends even to people who can't forgive themselves. Father Thomas nodded thoughtfully. And this sense of liberation, would you say it has made you a better person, more compassionate toward others, more effective in your ministry? Yes, Sister Bernadette replied without hesitation. I find myself able to counsel people struggling with guilt and shame from a place of authentic hope rather than theoretical theology. When I tell someone that God's love is unconditional, I believe it in my heart instead of simply reciting it from memory. Sister Claire leaned forward eagerly. Father, I've noticed changes in other people too. Yesterday, Mrs. Rodriguez came to confession for the first time in years. She said Amara had told her daughter that God misses people when they stay away from him, and that he never gets tired of welcoming them back home. And how could a 7-year-old child know about Mrs. Rodriguez's relationship with the church? Father Thomas asked. She couldn't, Sister Claire admitted. That's what makes this so remarkable. Amara seems to know things about people's spiritual needs that she has no earthly way of knowing. Father Thomas was quiet for several minutes, his experienced mind weighing the evidence against his deep understanding of both human psychology and divine mystery. Finally, he spoke with the careful authority that had guided his parish through decades of spiritual challenges. I believe we are witnessing something authentic here, he said quietly. Whether it constitutes formal private revelation in the technical sense, or whether it represents a more subtle form of divine grace working through a particularly sensitive child, I cannot say with certainty. But I can say that the fruits of this experience appear to be genuinely spiritual: healing, hope, renewed faith, and deeper compassion. He picked up the hospital bracelet again, turning it over in his weathered hands. Sister Bernadette, I want you to know that in the eyes of God and in the judgment of his church, you have never needed to earn forgiveness for the circumstances of your youth. The path that brought you to religious life may have begun in pain, but it has led to decades of faithful service that have touched countless lives with grace. Tears gathered in Sister Bernadette's eyes. But Father, the choices I made were the choices of a frightened young woman in impossible circumstances, he interrupted gently. God sees the heart, sister. He sees the love that motivated your choices, the fear that clouded your judgment, and the faithfulness that has marked your response to tragedy. If this child has helped you understand that truth, then she has given you a great gift indeed. Sister Margaret sat in thoughtful silence, her administrative concerns warring with growing recognition that something significant was happening in their community. Father, she said finally, if we accept that this child might be receiving authentic, Spiritual messages. What are our responsibilities? How do we protect her from exploitation while honoring what appears to be a genuine gift? Very carefully, Father Thomas replied. We continue to observe and discern. We document what occurs without sensationalizing it. We protect Amara's childhood, while remaining open to whatever God might be doing through her. And we trust that if this is truly of divine origin, it will bear fruit in ways that serve God's purposes rather than our own. As the meeting concluded, Sister Bernadette felt a sense of profound relief. For the first time since childhood, she was not carrying her secret alone. Father Thomas's wise perspective had confirmed what her heart had been telling her, that Amara's impossible knowledge and healing words represented something sacred, something that deserved their attention and reverence, rather than their skepticism or fear. That evening, as she knelt for prayers in her small cell, Sister Bernadette placed the hospital bracelet beside Amara's drawings on her bedside table. 3 objects separated by decades, 1 representing her deepest shame, 2 representing the miraculous healing that had come through the most unlikely messenger. For the first time in 43 years, she felt truly free. The old chapel bell had called people to worship for nearly a century, its bronze voice carrying across Detroit's east side with the same steady authority through boom times and recession, through hope and despair, through the countless small miracles and quiet tragedies that made up the texture of urban faith. Sister Bernadette had always found comfort in its unchanging rhythm, the way it marked sacred time in a world that often seemed to have forgotten the importance of ritual and reflection. But as she pulled the bell rope on Saturday morning, summoning the community to weekend mass, she felt a different weight in the bronze voice that echoed across the neighborhood. Tomorrow would be Sunday, and Amara had said it would be special, important for everyone who needed to hear about God's forgiveness and love. The child's words carried prophetic weight that Sister Bernadette could no longer dismiss as coincidence or imagination. The morning service proceeded with its familiar rhythms, but Sister Bernadette found herself watching the congregation with new eyes. There was Mrs. Chen, whose grandson's health scare had been accurately predicted by Amara weeks earlier. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in a back pew with her children, having returned to regular attendance after years of absence, a change that began, according to Sister Claire, with something Amara had said to her youngest daughter about God missing people when they stayed away too long. And there were others whose stories she didn't know, but whose faces bore the particular expression of people carrying burdens too heavy for their hearts. Amara had said that many people would need to hear God's message of love and forgiveness tomorrow. Looking at her community, Sister Bernadette could see the truth of that observation in every weathered face, every bowed head, every person who came seeking something they couldn't quite name. After the service, as parishioners filed out into the crisp autumn morning, Sister Margaret approached with the brisk efficiency that masked her growing internal conflict about recent events. Sister Bernadette, I need to discuss tomorrow's service with you. Word has been spreading through the neighborhood about unusual spiritual experiences occurring here. Father Thomas has received several calls from people asking about the child prophet at St. Augustine's. Sister Bernadette felt her heart sink. The last thing she wanted was for Amara to become the focus of sensational attention, or for their quiet community to be disrupted by curiosity seekers looking for supernatural entertainment. What kind of calls? Some genuine interest from people seeking spiritual guidance, Sister Margaret reported, but also inquiries from individuals who seem more interested in spectacle than in authentic faith experience. Father Thomas is concerned about protecting both the child and our community from inappropriate attention. Before Sister Bernadette could respond, they were interrupted by Maria Santos's arrival with Amara. The young mother looked more tired than usual, her hospital scrubs wrinkled from another long shift, but her expression carried an unusual mixture of pride and concern. Sisters, Maria said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard. I wanted to speak with you about what's been happening at home. Amara has been having more frequent conversations with her friend, and some of the things she's been saying have me worried. What kind of things? Sister Bernadette asked, though she suspected she already knew the direction of Maria's concerns. She told me that tomorrow is going to be a very important day for our chapel community. She said that people will come seeking answers to questions they've been carrying for years, and that her friend has asked her to help them understand something crucial about forgiveness and love. Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. She also said that someone is going to need to be very brave tomorrow to share a truth that will help many people heal. Sister Bernadette exchanged a meaningful glance with Sister Margaret. The child's words seemed to be building toward something significant, some kind of public revelation or testimony that would occur during tomorrow's service. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. Amara, who had been listening to their conversation with her characteristic attentive silence, stepped forward with the calm confidence that always surprised adults. Sister Bernadette, she said gently, my friend wants you to know that you don't have to be afraid of tomorrow. He said that when people need to hear the truth, he gives the right words to the people he chooses to speak for him. The words hit Sister Bernadette with the force of prophecy. Over the past week, she had been sensing that God was preparing her for something, some kind of public witness or testimony that would require her to step beyond the comfortable anonymity of her usual ministry. The idea terrified her, but Amara's reassurance carried the weight of divine promise. What truth does he want me to share? Sister Bernadette asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The truth about his love for people who think they're too broken to be loved. Amara replied simply, the truth about how he uses everything, even the sad and scary things, to bring about something beautiful, and the truth about how forgiveness isn't something people have to earn, but something he gives freely to everyone who asks. As the day progressed, Sister Bernadette found herself in a state of prayerful preparation that felt both familiar and entirely new. She had given homilies before, had counseled countless people about God's mercy and grace, had spoken publicly about faith and forgiveness on numerous occasions. But something about tomorrow felt different, more significant, more challenging, more likely to demand everything she had to offer. That evening, as the community gathered for their weekly reflection and prayer, Father Thomas addressed the growing anticipation about Sunday's service. Tomorrow, he announced, we will have the opportunity to witness and participate in something that I believe God has been preparing for our community. I ask that you come with open hearts and minds, ready to receive whatever message the Lord has for us. Amara sat in her usual pew, her small hands folded in prayer, her presence radiating the same peaceful certainty that had marked all of her interactions with the divine. She seemed completely untroubled by the attention and speculation swirling around her, focused instead on her private conversation with the friend who had chosen her as his messenger. After the evening service, as Sister Bernadette made her final preparations for the night, she found herself standing before the chapel's main altar, where the painting of Jesus looked down with eyes that seemed more alive than any artistic representation should be. In the quiet sanctuary, with only the sanctuary lamp casting its steady glow, she felt the presence of something sacred settling around her like a mantle of responsibility and grace. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space, "if you truly want me to speak tomorrow, if you truly want me to share my story with our community, then please give me the courage to be honest about your mercy. Help me to trust that your love is big enough to cover even my deepest shame, and strong enough to heal even the oldest wounds." As she knelt in prayer, she became aware of a small presence beside her. Amara had slipped away from her mother and come to kneel at the altar rail, her child's voice joining Sister Bernadette's in whispered prayer. They remained there together for several minutes, the elderly nun who had carried guilt for 43 years, and the 7-year-old child who had been chosen to deliver God's message of radical forgiveness. "He's very proud of you," Amara whispered. As they prepared to leave, "He said you've been practicing for tomorrow your whole life, even when you didn't know it." Sister Bernadette felt tears gathering in her eyes. "And what about you, dear one? Are you ready for whatever tomorrow might bring?" Amara smiled with the peaceful confidence that had characterized her throughout their extraordinary week together. "I'm just going to say what he tells me to say, when he tells me to say it. That's all anyone ever has to do." As they walked together toward the chapel entrance, where Maria waited to take her daughter home, Sister Bernadette realized that she was no longer afraid of tomorrow's service. Whatever God was planning, whatever truth he wanted shared, whatever healing he intended to bring to their community, she was ready to serve as his instrument, just as this remarkable child had been serving as his messenger. The chapel bell would ring again in the morning, calling people to worship as it had for nearly a century. But tomorrow, Sister Bernadette understood, it would be calling them to witness something extraordinary, a demonstration of God's love that would challenge everything they thought they knew about forgiveness, redemption, and the mysterious ways that divine grace worked in human lives. Saturday evening brought an unexpected visitor to St. Augustine's chapel. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, Director of Medical Records at Detroit General Hospital, arrived just as Sister Bernadette was completing her final preparations for Sunday's service. The middle-aged woman carried a manila folder with the careful reverence of someone who understood the life-changing potential of the documents within. "Sister Bernadette," Dr. Martinez said quietly, "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I received a rather unusual request yesterday from Father Thomas. He asked me to research some old medical records from the 1980s related to a young woman who gave birth at our hospital under difficult circumstances." Sister Bernadette felt her heart stop. She had not authorized Father Thomas to investigate her past, had not given him permission to contact anyone about the private details she had shared in confidence. Yet looking at Dr. Martinez's compassionate expression, she sensed that whatever revelation was coming would be profound rather than intrusive. "What did you discover?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Martinez opened the folder carefully, revealing documents that Sister Bernadette recognized, forms she had signed 4 decades earlier, medical records that documented the most devastating period of her young life. But there were other papers as well, documents she had never seen, official reports that carried information she had never received. "Sister," Dr. Martinez said gently, "the records show that you gave birth to a daughter on November 15th, 1981. The delivery was indeed complicated, and there were serious concerns about the infant's survival during the first several hours after birth." Sister Bernadette nodded, her throat tight with remembered anguish. "The doctors told me she died before taking her first breath." "That's what the initial report indicated," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "However, there was a mistake in the communication between the medical staff and the social workers handling your case. Your daughter did not die, Sister Bernadette. She survived the delivery complications and was placed in the hospital's care for several weeks while arrangements were made for adoption." The words hit Sister Bernadette like a physical blow. For 43 years, she had carried the crushing weight of believing that her child had died as a result of her poor choices and inadequate care. The guilt had driven her to religious life, shaped every prayer she had ever uttered, defined her understanding of God's judgment and her own unworthiness. She lived, Sister Bernadette whispered, sinking into the nearest pew as her legs gave way beneath her. She lived, Dr. Martinez confirmed, sitting beside the stunned nun with gentle compassion. She was adopted by a loving family and grew up healthy and happy. According to the records, she became a nurse herself, dedicating her life to caring for others. Sister Bernadette's mind reeled with the implications of this revelation. Everything she had believed about her past, about God's punishment, about the loss that had defined her spiritual journey, all of it was based on a tragic misunderstanding, a failure of communication that had condemned her to decades of unnecessary guilt. "Where is she now?" Sister Bernadette asked. Though part of her feared the answer, Dr. Martinez smiled gently. "That's the truly remarkable part of this story, sister. Your daughter was adopted by the Santos family. She grew up as Maria Santos, and she works right here at Detroit General Hospital, in the same building where she was born." The chapel seemed to spin around Sister Bernadette as the impossible truth settled into her consciousness. Maria Santos, the young woman who brought Amara to the chapel every day, who worked exhausting shifts to support her daughter, who had raised such an extraordinary child, was her daughter. The baby she thought she had lost 43 years ago had grown up to become a woman of strength and compassion who was now entrusting her own daughter to Sister Bernadette's care. "And Amara," Sister Bernadette whispered, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "Amara is my granddaughter." "Yes," Dr. Martinez confirmed, "which makes her impossible knowledge of your past somewhat less mysterious from a genealogical standpoint, though it doesn't explain the spiritual wisdom she demonstrates or her apparent ability to know things that occurred before she was born." Sister Bernadette sat in stunned silence, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of this revelation. The child who had been chosen to deliver God's message of forgiveness and love was not just a random messenger. She was family, the healing Amara had brought to her wounded heart was not just divine grace working through a stranger, but the completion of a circle that God had been drawing through 3 generations of women. "Does Maria know?" she asked finally. "Not yet," Dr. Martinez replied. "Father Thomas felt that you should be the one to decide how and when to share this information. The adoption records were sealed, and Maria has no knowledge of her biological mother's identity." As the immediate shock began to subside, Sister Bernadette found herself overwhelmed by the intricate beauty of God's plan. For decades, she had prayed for forgiveness for choices that had led to her child's death. Now she understood that those same choices had led to life, not just her daughter's survival, but her growth into a woman of faith and service who had passed those values on to her own daughter. More than that, God had orchestrated their reunion in the most perfect way imaginable. Instead of a dramatic revelation that might have been awkward or overwhelming, He had allowed them to develop a natural relationship based on shared faith and mutual care for Amara. Maria already trusted Sister Bernadette with her most precious possession, her daughter's daily care and spiritual guidance. Sister Bernadette already loved Maria as the devoted mother who had raised such an exceptional child. "How is this possible?" Sister Bernadette asked, though she was addressing the question more to God than to Dr. Martinez. "How could I not know? How could I not recognize my own daughter?" "You haven't seen her since she was hours old," Dr. Martinez pointed out gently. "And people rarely look for family connections when they believe those connections are impossible. But now that you know, can you see the resemblance?" Sister Bernadette thought about Maria's expressive dark eyes, her graceful way of moving, the particular tilt of her head when she listened intently. Features that had seemed familiar in a vague way now revealed themselves as inherited traits passed down through bloodlines she had thought were severed forever. More significantly, she recognized something deeper, the quiet strength that had allowed Maria to raise Amara as a single mother, the same determination that had driven Sister Bernadette to build a meaningful life from the ashes of early tragedy. The compassion that made Maria an exceptional nurse reflected the same impulse toward service that had motivated Sister Bernadette's decades of ministry. They were connected not just by blood, but by shared values that had been passed down through genes and grace. And Amara's spiritual gifts, Sister Bernadette mused aloud, her ability to know impossible things, to carry messages from God. Where does that come from? Dr. Martinez smiled mysteriously. That, sister, is beyond the scope of medical records. But I will say this, sometimes the most extraordinary gifts skip generations or emerge in ways that previous generations couldn't express. Perhaps your daughter inherited your deep faith, and her daughter inherited something even more profound. As Dr. Martinez prepared to leave, she handed Sister Bernadette the complete file of documents. "These belong to you now," she said gently. "Your story, your daughter's story, your granddaughter's story, they're all part of something much larger than any of you realized." Alone in the chapel with the revelatory documents spread before her, Sister Bernadette felt the final pieces of her spiritual puzzle clicking into place. Amara's impossible knowledge wasn't just divine revelation. It was the wisdom of a child who had been chosen to heal a family wound that spanned 3 generations. Her messages about God's forgiveness weren't addressed to a stranger, but to her own grandmother, who had been carrying unnecessary guilt for 4 decades. Most remarkably, Amara's certainty that the baby understood and forgave you took on profound new meaning. The child she thought had died had indeed understood on some level that transcended conscious awareness, that her birth mother's choices had been made from love rather than selfishness. Maria had grown up to become exactly the kind of person that Sister Bernadette had prayed her daughter would become: compassionate, faithful, devoted to serving others. The medical records revealed additional details that brought Sister Bernadette to tears. Maria's adoptive parents had been devout Catholics who had raised her with strong faith values. They had told her from an early age that her birth mother had loved her enough to make an impossible choice, ensuring that she would have opportunities and stability that a teenage mother couldn't provide. Maria had grown up without resentment toward her biological mother, instead carrying gratitude for the sacrifice that had given her a chance at a better life. Even more moving were the records showing that Maria had requested information about her birth mother when Amara was born, wanting to thank the woman who had given her life. But the sealed adoption files in Sister Bernadette's cloistered religious life had made such a connection seem impossible. God had been orchestrating their reunion for 7 years, waiting for the perfect moment when both women would be ready to receive the gift of restored family. As Sister Bernadette knelt before the altar with the documents scattered around her, like leaves from a family tree she had thought was barren, she understood that tomorrow's service would be about far more than sharing her testimony about God's forgiveness. It would be about revealing the magnificent complexity of divine love, how God had used her deepest shame to create a lineage of faith, how he had transformed her greatest loss into her most precious gift, how he had been weaving redemption through 3 generations of women who served him in different ways. Amara's prophecy about Sunday being important for everyone who needed to hear about God's forgiveness took on new dimensions. The congregation would witness not just the healing of an individual soul, but the restoration of a family that God had been protecting and nurturing even when they didn't know they were connected. They would see how divine love worked across decades, through sealed records and hidden identities, through medical mistakes and social service protocols, to bring about healing that was both personal and universal. Sister Bernadette picked up the original hospital bracelet she had saved. For 43 years, the plastic band that had marked her as the mother of a baby she believed had died. Tomorrow, she would wear it again, not as a reminder of loss and guilt, but as a symbol of God's faithfulness across generations. The bracelet that had represented her deepest shame would become evidence of His most creative grace. She gathered the medical records carefully, treating them with the same reverence she brought to sacred texts. These documents were more than bureaucratic paperwork. They were the written proof of miracle, the tangible evidence that God's plans extended far beyond human understanding or control. They revealed a divine love story that had been unfolding for decades, building toward a Sunday morning revelation that would transform not just her understanding of her past, but her entire community's understanding of how God worked in the world. As she prepared for sleep, Sister Bernadette realized that she was no longer just a nun who had found healing through a child's impossible wisdom. She was a mother who had been reunited with her daughter, a grandmother who had been blessed with the most extraordinary granddaughter imaginable, and a witness to God's ability to transform tragedy into triumph across multiple generations. Tomorrow's service would reveal the full scope of the miracle they had been experiencing all week. The congregation would learn that the child who carried divine messages was also the genetic link that completed a circle of love that had been broken by miscommunication and sealed by God's perfect timing. They would see that private revelation and family reunion were not separate phenomena, but two aspects of the same magnificent demonstration of divine grace. Sister Bernadette fell asleep, holding both her hospital bracelet and Amara's drawings, symbols of past pain and present healing that would tomorrow become testament to the mysterious and wonderful ways that God worked in human lives. Sunday morning dawned with the kind of crystalline October light that seemed to polish the world to a higher brightness. Sister Bernadette rose before the chapel bells, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the original rosary she had clutched during childbirth 43 years earlier. The same rosary she had held through decades of guilty prayers, and which would now serve as her talisman for the most important testimony of her life. The beads, worn smooth by countless desperate petitions for forgiveness, felt different in her fingers this morning. Where they had once represented her desperate attempts to earn divine mercy, they now symbolized God's patient love working across generations to bring about healing she could never have imagined. Each Hail Mary she whispered was no longer a plea for forgiveness, but a prayer of gratitude for the intricate beauty of divine providence. As she made her way to the chapel for morning preparation, she found Maria and Amara already waiting in the sanctuary. Maria sat in their usual pew, but her posture was different, more alert, more expectant, as if she sensed that something significant was about to unfold. Amara knelt at the altar rail in deep prayer, her small hands folded with the reverent concentration that had marked all of her spiritual encounters. "Good morning, sister," Maria called softly, her voice carrying the warmth that had developed between them over months of shared care for Amara. Looking at her now, really looking, Sister Bernadette could see unmistakable traces of her own younger face in Maria's features, the genetic inheritance that had been hidden by assumption and circumstance. "Good morning, dear ones," Sister Bernadette replied, her voice thick with emotion she could no longer entirely suppress. "How are you feeling about today's service?" Before Maria could answer, Amara rose from her prayers and approached with the calm certainty that had characterized all of her divine encounters. "My friend says today will be a day of great joy," she said simply. "He says that sometimes the most beautiful gifts are wrapped in paper that looks like sadness, but when you open them, you find exactly what your heart needed most." The prophetic words struck Sister Bernadette with their perfect appropriateness. Her deepest sadness, the loss of her child, was about to be revealed as God's most beautiful gift. The shame that had driven her to religious life had actually been the path that led to decades of faithful service and ultimately to reunion with a family she had never dared to hope she could know. Father Thomas arrived early, as was his custom, but Sister Bernadette noticed an unusual spring in his step, an anticipatory energy that suggested he understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. He had been instrumental in discovering the truth about her family connections, and now he would have the privilege of presiding over their public revelation. "Sister Bernadette," he said warmly, "are you prepared for what lies ahead today?" "As prepared as anyone can be for a miracle," she replied, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. All week she had been terrified of the possibility that she might need to share her story publicly. Now, with the full truth finally revealed, she felt only eagerness to testify to God's magnificent plan. Sister Margaret appeared with her usual brisk efficiency, but Sister Bernadette noticed something different in her colleague's manner, a softness around the eyes that suggested her administrative skepticism had given way to genuine recognition of the sacred. Over the past week, even Sister Margaret's practical mind had been forced to acknowledge that something extraordinary was occurring in their community. "The chapel is filling unusually early today," Sister Margaret reported. "Word has spread through the neighborhood about Amara's spiritual gifts, and people are coming who haven't attended service in years." Mrs. Rodriguez brought her entire extended family. "The Chen family is here with relatives from across the city. Even some of the hospital staff who work with Maria have come." Sister Bernadette felt both humbled and intimidated by the growing congregation. These were people seeking healing, answers, hope, and God had chosen to use her story, her shame, her miraculous family reunion to provide what they needed. The responsibility felt enormous, but Amara's peaceful presence reminded her that she was simply an instrument in divine hands. As the morning progressed and more people filled the pews, Sister Bernadette found herself in conversation with Maria about the day ahead. She longed to reveal the truth about their relationship immediately, to embrace her daughter and granddaughter with the joy of discovery. But she also understood that such a revelation needed to happen in the right context, with the proper preparation, in a way that would serve God's purposes rather than just satisfy her own emotional needs. "Maria," she said carefully, "I want you to know that whatever happens during today's service, whatever truths are revealed, they come from a place of love. God has been working in ways that none of us fully understood, and today we're going to see the full picture of His plan." Maria studied Sister Bernadette's face with the intelligent perception that had served her well as a nurse. "Sister, you've seemed different this week, more peaceful but also more emotional. Is there something specific you need to share today?" Before Sister Bernadette could answer, Amara appeared at her side with another of her impossibly perceptive observations. "Mama," she said gently, "Sister Bernadette has been carrying a secret that belongs to all of us. Today, her friend, my friend, wants her to share it so we can all understand how much he loves families, even families that don't know they're families." Maria's eyes widened at her daughter's words. Over the months of bringing Amara to the chapel, she had grown to love and trust Sister Bernadette as a spiritual mentor and surrogate grandmother figure. The possibility that their connection might be even deeper than she had realized sent a thrill of anticipation and apprehension through her heart. "What kind of secret, Mija?" Maria asked gently. Amara smiled with the radiant joy that appeared whenever she spoke about divine love. "The kind that makes people cry happy tears," she said simply. "The kind that shows everyone how God fixes things that people think are broken forever." As the service time approached, the chapel filled to capacity with a diverse congregation. that reflected the full spectrum of their community. Elderly parishioners who had attended St. Augustine's for decades sat beside young families drawn by stories of miraculous healings. Hospital workers who knew Maria professionally mingled with neighbors who had heard rumors of a child prophet. People who had drifted away from faith found themselves inexplicably drawn back by whispers of authentic spiritual experience. Sister Claire approached with barely contained excitement. "Sister Bernadette, I've never seen the chapel this full. For a regular Sunday service, there's an electricity in the air, a sense that everyone knows they're about to witness something extraordinary." Father Thomas took his place at the altar with the serene authority that had guided his parish through 5 decades of spiritual challenges, but even his experienced composure seemed touched by the anticipation that filled the sanctuary. He had agreed to allow Sister Bernadette to share her testimony during the homily, understanding that her story would serve God's purposes better than any prepared sermon. As the service began with familiar hymns and readings, Sister Bernadette felt her nervousness transform into peaceful determination. She looked out at the congregation, faces reflecting hope, curiosity, spiritual hunger, and understood that her story was not really her own. It belonged to everyone who had ever struggled with guilt, shame, loss, or the fear that their mistakes were too great for divine forgiveness. Most importantly, she looked at Maria and Amara sitting in their usual pew, her daughter and granddaughter, who had been prepared by God's providence to receive the most wonderful news imaginable. Soon they would understand that their little family was actually part of a larger story that stretched back generations, bound together by love that transcended time, circumstance, and even the mistakes that seemed to separate people from God's grace. The moment for her testimony was approaching, and Sister Bernadette fingered her rosary one final time before rising to address the congregation. In her pocket, she carried the hospital bracelet that had marked her as a mother 4 decades earlier, and in her heart she carried the joy of knowing that God's love had been working all along to bring about this moment of revelation and reunion. The chapel fell into expectant silence as Father Thomas introduced Sister Bernadette, his voice carrying the weight of 5 decades spent witnessing the mysterious ways that God worked in human lives. "Today," he announced to the packed congregation, "we will hear testimony about divine love, forgiveness, and the miraculous ways that God heals what we believe is permanently broken." Sister Bernadette approached the altar with Amara walking beside her, the child's presence providing both comfort and confirmation that this moment had been ordained by divine will. The elderly nun looked out at faces reflecting every shade of human experience: hope and skepticism, faith and doubt, desperate need and casual curiosity. These were the people God had gathered to witness his love story unfold. 43 years ago, Sister Bernadette began, her voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, I was a 19-year-old girl who made choices that led to consequences I thought would destroy my life forever. I became pregnant outside of marriage, faced judgment from my family and community, and gave birth under circumstances so difficult that I believed my child died as punishment for my sins. A murmur rippled through the congregation. This was not the typical Sunday homily they had expected, but the raw honesty in Sister Bernadette's voice commanded their complete attention. That tragedy drove me to religious life, she continued. I came to this convent seeking forgiveness for what I thought was unforgivable, carrying guilt so heavy that it shaped every prayer I offered for 4 decades. I devoted my life to serving God, hoping to earn the mercy I couldn't believe I deserved. She paused, her eyes finding Maria in the congregation. Her daughter sat forward in her pew, her expression reflecting growing understanding as pieces of an impossible puzzle began to fit together in her mind. Last week, this remarkable child, Sister Bernadette placed a gentle hand on Amara's shoulder, approached me with knowledge that no 7-year-old could possibly possess. She told me that Jesus had spoken to her about my pain, about the choice I had made long ago, about a baby who understood and forgave me even before I asked for forgiveness. Amara stepped forward with the confident composure that had marked all of her spiritual encounters. My friend told me that Sister Bernadette had been punishing herself for something that wasn't her fault, she said, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the packed chapel. He said that love never dies, and that sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning that people just can't see yet. Sister Margaret, despite her administrative concerns about irregular procedures, found herself moved by the obvious authenticity of what she was witnessing. This was not staged drama or emotional manipulation, but the genuine testimony of people whose lives had been touched by something sacred. Yesterday, Sister Bernadette continued, I learned the truth that God had been preparing me to receive. Through this child's impossible messages, the baby I thought died 43 years ago actually survived. She was placed for adoption and grew up to become a woman of faith, compassion, and service, a woman who dedicates her life to healing others in the same hospital where she was born. The congregation stirred with anticipation, sensing that they were approaching the climax of a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about divine providence and family bonds. Sister Bernadette turned toward Maria, whose face reflected a mixture of dawning realization and emotional overwhelm. Maria Santos, Sister Bernadette said gently, you are my daughter. The child I thought I lost became the woman who has raised the most extraordinary granddaughter I could ever have imagined. The chapel erupted in gasps, murmurs of amazement, and the sound of people weeping as the full magnitude of God's plan became clear. Maria sat frozen in shock, her mind reeling, as 43 years of questions about her origins suddenly found their answers in the most impossible and beautiful way imaginable. But before the emotional impact of this revelation could fully settle, Sister Margaret rose from her seat with the brisk authority that had defined her entire religious vocation. Her face reflected not joy at the miraculous reunion, but deep concern about the implications of what she was witnessing. Sister Bernadette, she called out, her voice cutting through the congregation's amazed responses. I must ask you to consider what you're doing here. These claims about divine messages through a child, about miraculous family reunions, about supernatural knowledge, they require careful investigation before being presented to our community as authentic spiritual experiences. The challenge sent a chill through the sanctuary. Here was the voice of institutional caution, the reasonable skepticism that sought to protect faith communities from deception and emotional manipulation. Sister Margaret's objection represented the part of religious life that valued order, documentation, and proper theological process over spontaneous claims of miraculous intervention. Amara looked up at Sister Margaret with the same compassionate directness she brought to all adult interactions. Sister Margaret, she said gently, my friend wants you to know that he understands why you need to protect people from false promises. He sees how hard you work to keep everyone safe, and he's grateful for your careful heart. The child's words, delivered without defensiveness or judgment, seemed to penetrate Sister Margaret's protective skepticism. But she continued to press her concerns. Child, what you're describing requires us to believe that God is speaking directly to you, giving you information that contradicts official records and medical reports. Even if Sister Bernadette and Mrs. Santos are indeed related, that doesn't validate claims of supernatural revelation. Father Thomas stepped forward with the pastoral authority that had guided his parish through countless spiritual challenges. Sister Margaret raises important concerns that reflect the Church's responsibility to discern authentic spiritual experiences from various forms of wishful thinking or emotional projection. However, I have spent the past week investigating not only the medical records that confirm this family connection, but also the fruits of this child's claimed divine encounters. He gestured toward the congregation, where faces reflected profound spiritual impact. Mrs. Rodriguez returned to regular attendance after years of absence because of something Amara told her daughter. The Chen family received accurate prophecy about their grandson's health. Multiple people in our community have reported experiencing healing, comfort, and renewed faith through their interactions with this child. The chapel held its breath as the confrontation between institutional caution and experiential faith reached its crucial moment. This was the testing point that every claimed spiritual experience must face, the challenge from those who demanded proof beyond personal testimony and emotional impact. As tension filled the chapel, Amara stepped forward with the calm authority that had marked all of her divine encounters. She looked directly at Sister Margaret, her dark eyes reflecting not childish defensiveness, but the profound compassion of someone who understood doubt as another form of love-seeking certainty. "Sister Margaret," Amara said, her clear voice carrying, "to every corner of the sanctuary, my friend wants to show you something that will help your careful heart understand that he really does speak to his children, especially when they need him most." Before anyone could respond, an extraordinary stillness settled over the chapel, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something so sacred that even the most skeptical hearts felt compelled to attention. The afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to intensify, casting rainbows across the altar with unusual brilliance. And then, as the congregation watched in stunned amazement, a single white rose appeared on the altar, not placed there by human hands, not dropped from some hidden location, but manifested in a way that defied every natural explanation. The flower seemed to materialize from light itself, its petals perfect and luminous, its fragrance filling the entire sanctuary with the scent of divine love. Sister Margaret stared at the rose with her mouth open, her administrative mind struggling to process what her eyes had witnessed. Around the chapel, people began to weep, not from emotion alone, but from the recognition that they were in the presence of something truly miraculous. "He said to tell you," Amara continued gently, "that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting his love, even when it shows up in ways that surprise the grown-up part of your heart. He said that questioning is another form of loving, and that he's proud of how much you care about protecting his people from false promises." The white rose seemed to pulse with inner light, its impossible presence serving as undeniable confirmation that something beyond human understanding was occurring in their small urban chapel. This was not psychological suggestion or group hysteria, but physical manifestation of divine power that challenged every rational explanation. Sister Margaret approached the altar slowly, her skepticism dissolving in the face of undeniable miracle. She reached toward the rose with trembling fingers, and when she touched it, her face transformed with wonder and recognition. "It's real," she whispered. "It's completely real." Father Thomas stepped forward with the pastoral wisdom that had guided his long ministry. "Sometimes," he said to the congregation, "God chooses to demonstrate his love in ways that transcend our need for documentation and institutional approval. Today we are witnessing not just the reunion of a family, but the manifestation of divine grace that calls us all to deeper faith." Amara turned to address the entire congregation, her small voice somehow reaching every heart with perfect clarity. "My friend wants everyone to know that he loves you exactly as you are. even the parts of yourselves that you think are too broken or too shameful for anyone to love. He wants you to know that he never wastes anything, not your mistakes, not your pain, not even your doubts. He uses everything to bring about something beautiful. Around the chapel, people began sharing their own testimonies. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke through tears about how Amara's simple words to her daughter had healed years of resentment toward the church. An elderly man testified that the child's presence had given him peace about his wife's recent death. A young mother shared how Amara's innocent question had led her to forgive herself for a past she thought was unforgivable. Maria finally found her voice, rising from her pew with tears streaming down her face. "Sister Bernadette," she called out, her words thick with emotion, "I have been searching my whole life for the woman who gave me life. I never imagined that God would bring us together in such a perfect way, through my daughter's gifts and your faithful service." The two women moved toward each other across the chapel, their embrace witnessed by a congregation that understood they were seeing the physical manifestation of God's redemptive love. 43 years of separation dissolved in that moment, replaced by the joy of family restored and purpose revealed. Amara stood beside the miraculous white rose, her mission as divine messenger reaching its completion. "He said to tell everyone that love never dies," she announced with radiant joy. "He said that families are forever, even when they can't see each other for a while. And he said that when people forgive themselves, they make room in their hearts for all the love he's been waiting to give them." The chapel filled with spontaneous singing as the congregation found their voices in hymns of gratitude and praise. The white rose continued to glow within a light, serving as a permanent reminder that they had witnessed authentic divine intervention in their small corner of the world. Sister Margaret knelt before the altar, her transformation from skeptic to believer serving as additional testimony to the power of what they had experienced. "Forgive me," she whispered to Sister Bernadette, "for doubting what God was doing through all of you. I was so focused on protecting our community that I almost missed the miracle he was giving us." The service concluded with a sense of completion and new beginning that touched every person present. They had witnessed not just a family reunion, but a demonstration of God's ability to transform shame into joy, loss into restoration, and doubt into unshakable faith. The white rose remained on the altar as they departed, evidence that the sacred had touched their ordinary lives in extraordinary ways. 3 months after that miraculous Sunday service, St. Augustine's chapel had become a different place, not in its physical structure or traditional rhythms, but in the spiritual atmosphere that permeated every gathering and prayer. The white rose, preserved by what could only be called divine grace, continued to bloom on the altar, its impossible vitality serving as a daily reminder that God still worked miracles in the lives of people who needed them most. Sister Bernadette.